CD3. On November the 24th, 1981, Adam and the Ants were to appear in front of the Queen at a Royal Command variety show. After performing ant music, and again I would sing live while the band mimed, I was to be presented to Her Majesty. The morning of the show I was summoned to a sit-down with Terry, Merrick and Gary. They were pissed off that they were not going to meet the Queen. I said that I was sorry, but it wasn't a decision that I could make. We had been told that it would only be me allowed to meet her. Returning to my flat after the sit-down, I drank tea, listened to Marvin Gaye and sewed up the split fly of my sex leather trousers for the sake of having something to do. After regaining my temper, I went back to the Theatre Royal and determined to go through with the performance as professionally as I could, while thinking about sacking the whole band and continuing with just Marco. The performance went well, and afterwards I met the Queen in a rented Moss Brothers tuxedo and wing-collared shirt, patent pumps and £50,000 worth of diamonds and sapphires. She shook my hand and asked if I minded playing to old fuddy-duddies like her, and said that she could hardly recognise me without my make-up. I mumbled something back and couldn't stop thinking, Christ, it's the Queen. I'm meeting the Queen. After she'd moved on, both Lou Grade and Bernard Delfont, the first moguls of British TV entertainment, came up and were very nice to me. Did I care that the enemy thought that I shouldn't have done the gig, and if I did, then I should not have worn a tuxedo? Did I fuck? The day wasn't over yet though. Tired and hungry, we went to Stringfellows, which had recently opened around the corner from the Theatre Royal. After a short while there though, I'd had enough of the arguing couple behind me and the guy across from me who was bad-mouthing the waiter, so we left. With Don driving north to my place in Primrose Hill, I chatted to his wife June for a while, and then two guys in another car started cutting us up, racing through red lights to tail us and flicking V signs at us. On Camden High Street, Don pulled over and so did they, blocking the front of our car. Two youngish guys got out and came over to Don's window. He rolled it down, an argument started and one of the guys punched Don. He threw a hand back, then reversed sharply and drove off. We lost them and I got home somewhat shaken, my pulse racing so fast that I couldn't sleep. I wrote the events in my diary, recording that I wished that the phone would ring, even though it's 4:30 a.m, and I knew that it wouldn't. But still I wrote, I childishly hope for company. It seems strange that my life can be so empty when I'm supposed to be so attractive to the opposite sex. I feel it has definitely scared off some people who seem put off by my material gains and wealth. Who knows? Maybe it's just me. I spent that Christmas with Mandy, and then on the 29th of December, the Ants played the first night of the Prince Charming Revue in Brighton. It was one of the worst performances that I'd ever given. Mandy had turned up unannounced the previous day, and then spent the whole night screaming about my affairs. By the time I hit the stage I was still furious and I couldn't hide it. I kicked things, butted the microphone stand, spat and scared everyone into grovelling submission to my ego. I still can't forget how badly I treated that audience. On the 18th of January 1982, I was the cover star of the New Musical Express. Inside, over 4 pages, their star writer, Paul Morley, struggled to come to terms with the fact that he'd enjoyed the Prince Charming Revue. He questioned me as if I was a traitor to his cause. Morley and the NME were the champions of Joy Division and the Smiths and the rest of the serious indie post-punk bands that wore grey overcoats from Oxfam and dared not smile in public. Some see you reducing pop to a very clean essence, he said to me, as if that was wrong. I'm sick and tired of being told that because I don't drink and don't smoke that I'm a goody two-shoes, I replied. OK, so I don't like drugs and that is a threat to the rock and roll establishment? Rock and roll has become the establishment. Don't you think you're merely an addition to a long line of glossy entertainers who don't actually stimulate young people to find out or look out, just a lolly to be licked, he asked. I replied, what can an entertainer do but provide hope through entertainment? All kids have been given over the past 12 months by a lot of people is a load of negativity. It's not about a celebration of music, it's politics, politics, politics. The interview was a stimulating encounter. He wrote that the review demolishes 20 years of standard pop star appearance. It is the work of someone who is at very least 20 times better than anyone ever pretended. And the phrase Goody Two Shoes stuck in my head, inspiring what would become my first solo single. First though, I took a holiday. I lay on a golden beach of Barbados with nothing to do and only my old mate Danny Kleinman for company. It was the worst thing I could have done. After only 2 days my mind was crowded with thoughts of Mandy back in Blighty without me, possibly with someone else. I was also scared that I'd never have another #1 hit record. With nothing to do and no woman to occupy my time, mind and body, I became depressed. I obsessed on Mandy and missed her as much as I resented her. Because I felt that she had rejected me, I had to have her back in my life. At one point I wrote in my diary that I might even love her. I never used the word and hadn't since Eve, Muswell Hill and the suicide attempt. After 4 days I called Don in London and had him arrange to fly Carol Kaplan out to be with me, with the idea that she could take my mind off Mandy. Carol arrived the next day and we had 3 days together before I had Don book us onto flights back to London, damning Barbados as a tropical hell. The endless days of sun, sea and food left me twitching with boredom and having terrible thoughts. On returning to London I called Mandy and she came to my flat. Clearly decided, she told me that she didn't want me anymore. I collapsed literally and crawled at her feet, begging her not to go. She looked scared, all the while telling me that it was too late. I felt broken inside. As she turned to leave, I snapped at her. Mandy half screamed, "You're scaring me," and ran out of the door into a rain-sodden street. I couldn't follow her, I was too upset to move. For hours I sat in my flat, unable to concentrate on anything or decide what to do, until, as the early morning light began to enter my windows, I decided that there was only one way to get over Mandy, and that was to work. I booked myself into a studio and spent the time alone, making music. 5 days after our terrible meeting, though, I waited at the foot of the steps into the Central School of Speech and Drama until Mandy came out. Thankfully, when she saw me, she smiled. We had a coffee. I apologised profusely. She forgave me. We made it up. I was so happy that I told her that I thought that I loved her and maybe, just maybe, we should think about living together. In the meantime, would she come to the Grammy Awards in LA with me? Of course she would. 2 weeks later I sat in London again. I had success and money, and I had Mandy beside me, but I felt miserable. I had remembered how awful it had been living with Eve, what that had led to, and really didn't think that I could live with anyone again. Eventually I told Mandy all of that, as honestly as I could. Amazingly, she said that she understood. In the end, we agreed that we could be friends. It was the only way that we could part. It was very, very important to me that Goody Two Shoes be a hit, and not just a top 5 hit. It had to go to #1. We filmed the video for the single at a spooky old Victorian sanatorium in Virginia Water. I hired former Bond girl Caroline Munro. I also got the great Graham Stark, the sergeant in the Peter Sellers Pink Panther movies, to appear as my butler, and the long-suffering wife of TV's Alf Garnett, Dandy Nichols, to appear as my cleaner. But the video didn't have the immediate desired effect. On the Tuesday that the chart was announced, in which Goody Two Shoes was to have risen to the top, I thumped the table and yelled, at no one in particular, "#2! #2! I had finished what I thought was my best video to date, only for it not to get me to the top slot in the chart. I was distraught. #1 was essential so that I could establish myself as a solo artist and move on to other things, such as an acting career, safe in the knowledge that I could go back to music at any time. In my desperation for the top slot in the singles chart, I blamed CBS for not doing enough to get it there. I telephoned them every day, talking to different departments from the managing director through to marketing to the press office. The next week it stayed at #2, and I became resigned to it never reaching #1. I continued to appear on as many TV shows as I could get on, and did as many newspaper interviews as I could. Just as the 3rd week's chart was announced, I wrote in my diary that I was in 3 minds about what to do. I could work harder to conquer the shitty music business, I could throw it all away and leave the business, or I could go and work hard at getting acting parts. And then the single made the #1 position. On hearing it announced, I immediately felt calmer and confident that now I could move on. Early in September 1982, Doreen, my father's second wife, died. I had the most beautiful marble headstone put in place and stood at the grave with Les, feeling strangely protective towards him. He was clearly heartbroken. Afterwards, I took Les shopping and bought him 2 new suits and transformed the pathetic empty man, who was my father, into an almost handsome bastard. I also bought him a motorbike and told him to go and get a job and a new life. At the time of Doreen's death, Friend or Foe the single had been released. I had been rehearsing with a new band, getting ready for a tour to support the album release. But for the first time, I was beginning to suffer from stage fright. Maybe it was because it was Adamant and his men and not Adam and the Ants. The Friend or Foe tour was a gamble that I had to win. I was changing everything again, from my look to the band and musical direction. Would the fans understand and still support me? The pain was terrible. 3 songs into the set and my knee had exploded. It felt as if someone was sticking a red-hot poker into it. I looked toward the wings where Stan Tippins, our road manager, was standing and waved him on. He knelt by me. "What's up, Adam?" I couldn't talk, just pointed at my left knee and leaned into his shoulder. Stan half carried me off stage. The band ended the number and followed. The Cleveland crowd were booing and clapping at the same time. What a place to collapse, I thought, the home of rock and roll. Finally, a doctor arrived and gently felt around the joint of my knee. "I think you've bust a cartilage." "Okay, but can I get back on stage?" The doctor couldn't believe it. "Give me something to ease the pain and strap the knee. I'll get it looked at tomorrow." He shook his head, got a couple of Tylenol from his bag and passed them to me. 20 minutes after I'd collapsed, I went back and finished the gig on one leg, hopping about and trying not to dance. The crowd seemed to appreciate it. It was February 1983 and we were 9 dates into a 48-day tour of America that was supposed to seal the conquering of the USA by Adamant. Thus far, though, the tour had been depressing. When we'd arrived, there had been only one car to meet us at JFK Airport, and when we got to the hotel, our rooms had been double booked. The only good news was that Goody Two Shoes was shooting up the US singles chart while Friend or Foe was doing the same in the album chart. I thought that the tour could only increase sales of both, and so we set off around the country, and then my knee exploded. The X-rays showed that my kneecap had come away completely and would have to be fixed immediately. So the band flew back to London while Marco and I flew to New York so that I could be operated on. 3 days after arriving, I was wheeled down to the operating theatre. The orderly crashed and banged the bed into walls, and then, outside of the theatre, proceeded to shave my leg with an open razor and no foam. As he finished, he gave me a gold-toothed smile and nodded toward the door, behind which a pneumatic drill was pounding away. "You next," he grinned. All I could think was, I haven't had sex for 10 days. The operation went perfectly. After a couple of weeks, I went to LA to appear on the live TV broadcasts of the Motown 25th birthday concert. It was the strangest and most wonderful thing meeting my musical heroes. As I stood quietly and respectfully watching on an engineer's monitor backstage, I felt a tap on my shoulder, and there, holding out their hands, were Marvin Gaye and Smokey Robinson. Stevie Wonder arrived, wearing a soft leather suit and an African beaded hairdo with a long ponytail. He stood, clinging to the arms of people with him, and giving off an air of serenity. He played a remarkable medley of hits on stage and gave a touching and sincere speech about how precious the power of communication in music is. I thought, watching him, that somehow Stevie Wonder had become holy, like a priest almost. Bullshit, I knew, but his music means so much to me still. Next up was Michael Jackson performing Billie Jean and debuting the moonwalk while wearing diamond socks and one matching glove. He brought the place to a standing ovation. Guess who was up after him? And now, from London, England, Adamant. On I went for my first ever solo outing in front of the Hollywood elite. It was my intention to introduce them to a little English cheeky sexuality, so I wanted to be almost over the top, singing Baby Where Did Our Love Go by the Supremes. I danced through the instrumental middle eight with a stiff leg, moving over to the left-hand stairway where I sat facing the crowd. Suddenly they went crazy, clapping and cheering. Christ, I've cracked it, I thought. I'm killing them. So I got up off the stair to sing the last two verses and looked towards the centre of the stage, and there, in a tight glittering pencil skirt, was Diana Ross. I thought, please, leg, don't give up on me. Somehow my shock turned into confidence and I slinked over to and around the beautiful superstar singing, I've got this burning, burning yearning deep inside of me, into her big brown eyes. She was really enjoying it. As I circled her, she said, oh yes, and I felt like her slave. I was on an incredible high when it was all over. During the last year of staying in bleak hotel rooms and riding dingy buses, I'd forgotten how special show business could make me feel. Not long after that magnificent night, I fell madly in love. I met Jamie Lee Curtis at a dinner party. It was electric. All night I tried to get close and grab a moment with her. When she left, we stared at each other before kissing on the lips quickly, but it was with as much tenderness as company around us would allow. In the hallway at one point she touched my hand and I held hers. A couple of days later we had lunch. After, we went to a photo shoot for my agency photos. As I sat waiting for the makeup woman to arrive, Jamie leaned over and gave me a quick kiss on the lips. Sorry, she said shyly, I had to do that. The makeup woman appeared and I had to go to work. Jamie left but sent a card. It read, Adam, I'm sorry I had to leave. I would have loved to stay with you. I hope to get to see you again somewhere. You are very special. With much affection, Jamie. My return to England in the autumn of 1983 was greeted with a delightful contingent of teenage girls and reporters from 4 major Sunday tabloids, all of who wanted to know what I was going to do next. Come to that, so did I. On October the 4th, I wrote in my diary, Tonight the ground opens up and swallows me with fear and loathing. The fear is of failure in the next few months with Puss in Boots and Strip, the album, and then Playboy, the next single. The plan is made. I loathe the people around me who seem totally incapable of seeing the effort required to adequately serve this piece of work. I understand that Duran Duran, who a year ago wouldn't have caused a pause in a sentence, released simultaneously with me. They are very strong and I'm apparently to prove how good I am. The next day I began filming the video for Puss in Boots with a new dancer girlfriend, Karen, as the leading lady. She was great. The video looked fantastic, and when the single was released, with the video getting heavy airplay, it sold 100,000 copies in its first week, eventually climbing to number 5, one place ahead of Duran Duran's Union of the Snake. Back in Los Angeles at the end of October, I didn't care about journalists asking if I thought that I could come back from the dead, because I knew that I had. Instead, I just looked forward to seeing the woman who had been in my mind for the past 4 months. Jamie was waiting on my Los Angeles doorstep as I returned, sweaty and grimy from the gym. I pecked her, invited her in and rushed to the shower. A couple of minutes later, dressed and refreshed, we started again, with her going out the front door and knocking, and me letting her in. Then we both just grinned at each other and started touching and kissing. We spent a week together making love, laughing, eating breakfast in public, talking about our lives. We snogged in the back row of a movie theatre watching Danton and ate dinner in intimate restaurants. I felt relaxed for the first time in so long. Jamie was one of the most positive people I ever met. She was always happy to see me, very tactile and generous with her affections. In the middle of November, I was asked to crown Miss World. The night before, I went to the movies with Jamie and her mother, the beautiful Janet Leigh, and then had dinner with her father, Tony Curtis. It seemed as though I was living in a dream. On a one-night stopover in London to pick up an Anthony Price suit for the Miss World pageant, I took my mum and Tony for supper with Don and his wife June at a swanky restaurant. As waiters sucked up to me, the pop star, I looked across at my mum, pale and lovely and almost shivering with fear. Suddenly I realised that while we all sat there confident and assured, my mum, who had probably only ever been out to supper at most a dozen times in her whole life, was unsure of how to act. I felt ashamed of myself. Back in LA, Jamie and I agreed to spend Christmas in England at my new house in the country with Don and June. Jamie had to go ahead without me, not only because I had to spend a couple more days promoting the album in New York, but also because the UK tabloids had decided that she and I were ready to get hitched. One paper sent a female reporter to interview me with the express mission to get me to reveal that Jamie was the love of my life. In England, the press chased Jamie everywhere from the moment that she arrived with the same questions. As I wrote in my diary, this was not a bad thing for either of us, press or career-wise, but I wrote, "I am not in any shape to get too serious about anybody." Jamie was very special to me and I cared about her, but I could still not even think about getting totally involved with any one person. Then there was the fact that I didn't want to be known simply as the boyfriend of a famous Hollywood actress, which she was rapidly becoming. After making early preparations for a tour of America to begin in early 1984, I travelled to the UK and took Jamie to visit my mum and Tony in their council flat. She was such a joy to be with, and treated my parents with such respect that within a couple of hours they were all hugging and kissing. Since my house in the country was still not in any shape to stay in, we spent 8 days in my Primrose Hill flat, which almost proved to be the end of the relationship. It felt too much like being married to me. Jamie was always so positive and bubbly, and I was such a misery that, as I wrote in my diary after she'd returned to America, I would be surprised if she ever spoke to me again. By the time my next tour of America began in Alabama in February 1984, I felt confident, fit and positive that this would be the one to finally break me in the States. The stage show proved to be hard physical work though, and almost broke me instead. Each night ended with me immersed in a Perspex tank, rising from water wearing nothing but shorts, as the band played strip. Getting in and out of the tank played havoc with my knee, even though exercise had replaced sex in my life before and during the tour, which helped strengthen my leg. Mid-tour, I spent 3 days with Jamie in LA staying at her penthouse. The first day was great, just seeing her, touching her and sleeping in her bed was lovely. She rose at 6:30 a.m. to get to the gym, and I slept until 1 p.m. In the kitchen eating breakfast, I felt human for the first time in so long that it was like coming out of an anaesthetic. By the end of the second day I began to feel like a wallflower though. I read a script of a movie that she was making with John Travolta, Perfect, and told her that I didn't think it was very good. I told her that I was fed up being treated as if I were another pet in the house, and let go at her about the script. Our dinner ended in tears, with most of them coming from me. The last day together, Jamie was moody, obviously because of my comments about the script, I assumed. After a walk with the dog late that night, though, she came out with her feelings. She was confused that our relationship wasn't total. She didn't put it about. I was the one for her, and she usually moved in with a guy when she felt that way. I was flattered but told her that I couldn't live with a woman. The next day, when Jamie dropped me at LAX airport on my way to rejoin the band for the rest of the tour, she seemed to be in a sensible mood, if a little sulky for her. 3 weeks later I was back in LA, making a Honda commercial with Grace Jones. She was lovely and it was nice to be dressed well for a change too, in my gun grey two-tone Anthony Price suit. The ad would cause something of a stir when it was released, because Grace decided that she'd bite my earlobe in the final shot, and the director kept it in. America didn't like the sight of a beautiful black woman biting a nice young white man, it seemed. While in LA, I met up with Jamie for the last time. She told me that she had to be in control of everything in her life, including her relationships, in order to get through her work. Our goodnight kiss was chaste, and as it turned out, final. At the end of April, the tour ended. I was excited and happy because it had gone pretty well, all things considered. Plus, I had a part in a movie at last, the lead villain in a supernatural thriller called Nomads, written and directed by John McTiernan. Unfortunately, after only a couple of days on set, I realised that this was going to be far from my big Hollywood break. It began when the director rejected my personally chosen outfit. I'd found a fantastic ankle-length cattleman's duster coat in Paramount Studios' wardrobe, which had been worn by Steve McQueen in Tom Horn. I'd teamed the coat with all combat gear because my character was an ex-Vietnam veteran. Instead, McTiernan decided that I should wear a ridiculous camp punk outfit with tails and a leopard print waistcoat. It seemed that he'd recently discovered punk and thought that it was the coolest thing around. I refused to wear their clothes and stuck with my choice, which is possibly one of the reasons that my scenes in the movie are reduced to just one, in which I am whacked over the head by Pierce Brosnan with a rubber tire iron. Pierce was a very serious actor and really got into his role. In fact, he got so into it that despite the tire iron being rubber, I ended up with a gashed head. He hit me so hard that the thin metal centre of the bar broke through. He was apologetic afterwards, but during the filming he became his character, and I could see the fury and determination to kill my character in his eyes. The experience showed me how hard it was going to be for me to break Hollywood. It made me look forward to getting back to England. I had been away for too long and missed everything about my home. Or rather, nearly everything. "Hello, Nan. What's up? Are you okay?" "I'm all right, dear. Don't worry about me. It's your dad." Of course it is, I thought to myself. What's he done now? Has he been drinking and bothering you again? I'll bloody... No, not me. It's the police. He's been arrested. Drunk and disorderly, drunk driving, he hasn't hurt anyone. Well, no. It's awful, though, Nan sniffed. She'd obviously been crying. Nan, don't worry, just tell me what he's done and where he is so I can go and bail him out. Oh no, you don't need to, love. He's home. I just thought you should be told about it before anyone else tells you. He's been arrested because a 13-year-old boy says he made improper suggestions to him. After I'd put the phone down to her, I called Les and he told me his side of the story. Anger built slowly within me as he did. I told him that I'd get him the best lawyer I could find. He'd already spent 2 days in the cells being questioned by police. Hopefully he'd told the same story to them as he had to me, that the boy was making it up, basically. The thing was, I didn't know if I believed him. That call came in the middle of an incredibly busy time for me. I was in the third of a 6-week run of Joe Alton's Entertaining Mr. Sloane at the Manchester Royal Exchange Theatre. That summer I had recorded a new solo LP, Viva La Rock, which I felt very good about. Epic and very rock and roll, it could almost have been a Bowie LP circa 1973. Unfortunately, the public didn't seem to want Bowie circa 1973, and on release in July, the title track entered the singles charts at 64. But on Saturday the 13th of July, I played Live Aid at Wembley where I met Princess Diana and Prince Charles in the pre-gig lineup. Diana said I'd melt in my leathers. I said I had to go on early so it was okay. As we went on to perform that day, I saw a sea of faces in front of me and the air was cooler and calmer than anywhere else I'd been. As the boys got ready, I said, "The world is watching, let's feed it." And as they crashed out the opening chords of Viva La Rock, I went into a crazy dynamic whirl that left me winded by the guitar solo, but on we pressed. And then, too soon, it was over. Later, as I watched Sting, Bowie and Queen play their numbers on the Band Aid stage, it all clicked. I've only just begun, I realised. There's no point moaning. Just get on with it, I told myself. Write great songs. So on weekends, when not rehearsing Sloane in Manchester, I wrote new songs. In late August, the play opened and the reviews appeared. Adamant is a guileless Sloane without enough vicious menace, said the Daily Telegraph. And however much you say that it doesn't, it hurts. Still does. After weeks of rehearsal and self-questioning, the reviews of my first night were not good, but as ever I couldn't dwell on things. As soon as the play ended at the end of September, I flew to America and went straight to the set of The Equalizer, a hugely successful American television series starring the English actor Edward Woodward. I played the bad guy and realised then that doing Sloane had been useful, not only because it gave me credibility in the eyes of legitimate actors, but because I found myself using techniques I'd learned on stage as I played my part. Making The Equalizer was a great experience for me. Woodward was the consummate actor, a true professional and great to watch. By the end of the shoot I felt that I could no longer say, hand on heart, that music was my sole love anymore. Now there was something else. I flew back to England on Concorde. Its elegant design is marred by the economy-style cramped seats, I wrote in my diary. It's a tourist trap in the sky. I was full of the joys of acting. Unfortunately, I had to go straight into rehearsals for an upcoming European tour with the band. We had dancing girls, extravagant lighting and a creeper-covered metal bridge across the stage that I could run along and over for the Viva La Rock tour. The band was hot, and for a while it looked as if things might start improving on the music front in Britain. However, the opening night at Hammersmith Odeon was almost wrecked when the lighting rig refused to work. The UK shows didn't get much better, and I began turning my thoughts to an acting career as a real alternative to pop music. I decided that if I wanted to make it in movies, then I'd have to live in Los Angeles. My pop career in England was over, I decided. A month later, after the second date in the US, I told myself that I'd never play live in the UK again. In less than 3 weeks, Viva La Rock had sold over 100,000 albums in the US, whereas in the UK it entered the charts at number 42 and then dropped. However, as the tour moved across America in November 1985, the album promotion dried up, and I felt that CBS were not helping as much as I'd hoped. We were filling stadiums from Chicago to San Diego, Houston to Albany, yet other dates were being cancelled as the album failed to make the top 40 charts. Before the tour had begun, Don and I parted company, but I had been approached by Miles Copeland, the manager of the Police, and Sting. We got on well and agreed to work together. In mid-December 1985, Miles informed me that CBS would let me go if I wanted. Viva La Rock had not been the success that any of us had hoped. All I had to do was chat with their head of A&R, and if we couldn't agree on how to work together, then I could leave the label. I knew before Miles put the phone down how such a meeting would go. I was leaving CBS. I spent most of Christmas and New Year 1985 in London, worrying about Les, my future, and what was going to happen next. I couldn't bring myself to visit my father, but was kept up to date on what he was doing by members of the family. I felt lost, with no creative thoughts or direction to take. I'd now released 2 failed albums in a row. A third would surely take me out of the game altogether. Leaving the music career to Miles to handle, I moved to Los Angeles at the end of January 1986. In February, Les was finally charged with conspiracy to commit gross indecency against a minor and was put in Brixton Prison to await trial. Of course, he was kept out of the general prison population because of his crime. However, he told me that on his arrival, a bunch of inmates sang "Stand and Deliver" as he passed. I started to get myself seen in Hollywood attending parties. At one of the first, I met Cher, George Michael, Prince, and my old mate Steve Jones, the ex-Pistol, all in the space of 20 minutes. It was good to be away from London, making a fresh start. I was going to readings for movies, being sent scripts, and even being offered parts, including the role that Bob Dylan eventually took in Hearts of Fire, although none that I thought worth taking. I felt positive and fit. All I needed was something to happen to put me back in the public eye. Then, one early morning in March, I found myself back in the newspapers. Unfortunately, it wasn't particularly good news. It was around 2 a.m. and I was driving home in my rented Nissan Maxima, having finished writing and recording demos of new songs at a small studio on Melrose. I came around a blind corner and noticed a helicopter hovering overhead with a searchlight almost on me. As I glanced up, a small white Honda came flying around the corner in the opposite direction and slammed into the side of my car. Since the Honda was being hotly pursued by 8 police cars, I didn't have to wait too long to report on what had happened. I held my breath as the police cars emptied, and the officers all stood in the road with their guns out in the fire position, legs apart, arms outstretched. They then pulled the driver out of the other car and arrested him. My car was totaled, and there was glass all over the place. I wasn't bleeding, but a paramedic took my blood pressure anyway. I answered every question put to me politely with lots of sirs, just as Don had taught me, before packing my tapes into a squad car and being driven home. The next day, apparently, the Sun reported that I had been dragged lifeless from the burning wreck of my Ford Mustang, close to death. As accurate as ever. A couple of weeks later, I took Raquel Welch out for a meal and a movie, out of Africa. She had called me a couple of times, and I, like most heterosexual men of my age, was in awe of her. As we walked from her hotel to my car, Raquel sighed and said, "The last person to pick me up in this hotel was Steve McQueen, on his motorbike." I gulped as quietly as I could and helped her into my Honda. What can you say about a date with a legend, an icon? She was gorgeous, funny, and very smart. We had a pals' night out, no more. I knew that if anything more had happened, I'd feel like a toy boy. She let me kiss her on the cheek before walking off to her hotel. Over the next few months, Raquel would occasionally call me for another date, asking for advice about her starting a singing career, but, feeling like I was living out a Derek and Clive sketch, I kept politely declining. Meanwhile, I had grown much closer to Karen and found myself missing her a lot, while also knowing that if I flew her out to LA to be with me, I'd be trying to get rid of her after 3 or 4 days. Instead, I returned to London to see her, and while there received a letter from Les. He wrote, "If I had the strength of character or will, I would finish it all, knowing what is yet to come." The letter continued, "God, what I've done to you, Mum, and the family. I have not the right to ask your forgiveness, not even the right to ask you to regard me as your father, and yet I do so right. Try in time to forgive me, my dear son." I'm not sure that I did forgive him. The best I could do for Les was to understand and help as much as I was able. I understood that the beatings he took from his father must have caused some damage to his mind. I also knew how naive he was and how lost he felt without Doreen to look after him. Since Doreen's death, he'd spent his days making model aeroplanes, and the local kids took to hanging around his place because they used to enjoy making models with him, and he liked the company. He was vulnerable and easy to exploit. At the end of May, Miles Copeland called me in LA and said that MCA had offered an advance of £250,000 for my next album. It was great news. Only one other thing could make my life complete, a decent film role, and in August I got one, to play opposite Tom Hulce, the Best Actor Oscar winner for Amadeus, in Slamdance. The first run-through took place at a small theatre named the Zephyr on Melrose. We all introduced ourselves and then read our lines. Tom Hulce was very friendly and had the most expressive face I'd ever seen. I got through the read-through by using my usual uptown Cockney accent, but felt very much in awe of everyone. I had to play Jim, Tom Hulce's best mate. Hulce's girlfriend is found murdered and the police suspect Hulce of doing it. It's an attempt at modern film noir that almost works. Throughout 1986 I was in demand as an actor. While making Slamdance, I had turned down the chance to play the lead in a David Hare play, Knuckle, in London because I thought that it was a backward step in my acting career. It would also have conflicted with my next movie role, which was as the bad guy in a futuristic thriller titled World Gone Wild, opposite the great Bruce Dern. Shot in Tucson in February 1987, the film is a kind of Mad Max meets Waterworld. Set in 2087, water is the most precious commodity in the world, which has been devastated by a nuclear war. Dern plays a kind of world-weary good guy who rescues an outpost of civilization from marauding bad guys, led by me. Bruce Dern was smart and opinionated, offering suggestions as to how his character should be played from the first read-through, which encouraged me to do the same. The production was well financed and the sets looked great. The film wasn't a box office smash, but it earned fair enough reviews and has since become a bit of a cult movie. Back in London briefly for Christmas 1986, I managed to get Les to agree to see a psychiatrist who prescribed anti-drinking pills which made him sick if he drank alcohol. The Director for Public Prosecutions then refused my lawyer's request that the name Adamant be struck from proceedings in Les's case. It was a blow. I wanted to protect my mum and Tony, who too many people thought was my real dad and had been given a hard time. I had to go back to the USA to make my next movie, and 2 weeks before the case was due to go to court, Les's psychiatric report came through. He was seriously suicidal. A week later he was in the hospital wing of the prison. He'd had a fit of some kind and bitten almost through his tongue. Nan then told me that he'd had a couple of similar fits in the past year, but no one had told me. For the first time in 30 years I sat and cried for my father, not because of him, but for him. I kept feeling the loneliness and desperation he must have gone through and, finding no solution, must have cracked and withdrawn into a terrible hell of insanity. Les pleaded guilty but still had to attend court. I was in London on a brief break from film work. I heard the news on the radio in a black cab. Pop star Adamant's father was sentenced to 2 years at the Old Bailey this morning. I felt relieved, both because it was over and because Les was in prison and could get help there. Early in 1988, I got a lead role in a TV film called Out of Time, with stand-up comedian Bill Maher. I again played the bad guy though, and was beginning to worry that I was being typecast, and I kept being offered horror movie parts too, all of which I refused. At the time, Marco was producing and playing with a band named Max, as well as working with Sinead O'Connor, and it wasn't until 1989 that he and I would get together as a team again to create new songs for what would be my first album on MCA, and the first for almost 4 years. In the summer of 1988, I was back in my hometown feeling as if the previous 8 years hadn't happened. I painted my Primrose Hill flat and contemplated doing up my godmother's council flat. Marco joked that I'd become Andy Man again when I turned up at his place to paint his back bedroom. I might not have been doing it for money, but the feeling of thrashing around desperately trying to keep busy, keep working at anything buzzed around my head constantly. Thankfully, in the spring and early summer of 1989, Marco and I finally got to record and mix my 4th solo album, Manners and Physique, with producer Andre Simone. He played or programmed everything except the guitars, which Marco played. All of us were more than happy with the finished product. We just had to hope that the public also liked it. It was a very different sound for Adamant, so it seemed fitting that it would be released at the beginning of a new decade. The years 1987, 88 and 89 were not particularly good for me. I had movies released, but by 1988, and after the sad death of my acting agent in LA, Anne Dollard, in a riding accident, I was not being offered any decent film or stage roles. I recall rejecting one offer to star in a stage version of Around the World in 80 Days in London, and another to play Charles Manson in a biopic. I had no record deal. For 3.5 years I filled my time trying to work, despite not having any. I read countless books, many of them biographies, and saw hundreds of movies. I told myself that it was all research for the numerous screenplays that I was either writing or about to begin. I wrote and then rewrote one screenplay, London Bridge, 3 times with a screenwriter named Joel Cerno, and it was almost made 3 times. I also researched and made lots of notes on a possible screenplay about the life and times of a Regency-era boxer from London named Daniel Mendoza, and had another idea about London-based gangsters in a screenplay that I titled Piccadilly, neither of which were finished. Slowly and surely I slipped into a depression. I wrote in my diary at the end of 1988, "How much of a distant memory I've become. The continued effort to assure people that I am recording my new album is a charade, but some mechanism forces me to do it. I can't give up. It's all that I have that doesn't answer me back." Throughout that time I suffered from several physical illnesses, from eczema and the common cold to strange cramps in my neck and severe headaches. I continued to eat as well as I ever had, but because my days held no routine, I would sometimes sleep away whole days and then suffer from insomnia at night. Whenever illness or boredom got too bad in LA, I'd fly to London and stay in my Primrose Hill flat. For the first few days of peace, quiet and herbal tea in London I'd be happy and question myself on why I'd moved over 6,000 miles away. I'd catch up with friends and family, eat at favourite restaurants and see old girlfriends. Invariably though, by the 5th day in London I'd be eager to get back to LA where I was sure that work was waiting for me. It usually wasn't. At the height of my fame, I always had people around me. I would occasionally rant at people who worked for me, or girlfriends, when in one of my manic phases, but the objects of my anger were many and different. Unfortunately, during the late 1980s, Karen bore the brunt of my anger. By now, Karen and I had been seeing each other on and off for 5 years. After a particularly awful and tear-filled split and making up, she began suggesting that we get married and live together in Los Angeles. I was as resistant to the idea as I'd ever been. Karen didn't raise the marriage question again, but occasionally she stopped me in my tracks by asking, "Why can't we live together?" But when I began looking for a house to buy, I asked Karen to come to LA and help me find one. She did, and so it seemed natural that in December 1988, she arrived at my newly acquired house in Meadow Valley Terrace with a box full of Airedale puppy, christened Elvis, and a plan to become an actor while living with me. In January though, barely 3 weeks after she'd arrived, I wrote, "Karen and I live together, but I don't feel any desire to kiss or cuddle her whatsoever. She's a housemate helping me to settle in." When Marco travelled to LA to work on songs for an eventual new album with me sometime later, he stayed at the house. He and Karen didn't get on, and there was an air of hostility between them. I was rapidly falling out of love with her, and that was a shame. I began to pretend that everything was fine, and poured all of my frustration about our affair and the mess that she and Elvis were making of the house in my diary. There were still times, though, that I couldn't contain my bad feelings, and I'd become cold, distant and brutally honest about her and us. Naturally, it was upsetting for Karen, and soon after our arguments I'd apologise, and we'd go back to a kind of bliss for a couple of days before my resentment about her cramping my life would begin to build. How or why she stuck it out with me for so long I don't know. But by the summer of 1989, after the addition to our family of another Airedale, a female named Alfie, I'd begun to notice that Karen was spending a lot of time out of the house, despite not having any work as such to go to. I began to suspect and even hope that she was seeing another man. Then, on a visit to London during the summer, I had an affair with another woman, ironically also named Karen. One night, having entertained the new Karen, the telephone rang at 3 a.m, and Karen in LA's voice filled my fuzzy head. I was cool and offhand with her, and after the shortest conversation said good night and put the phone down with a final click. The next day, over lunch with an old friend, she told me that I had to call Karen in LA and ask her to leave the house before I got back. I could then make a new start and get on with promoting a new album, which had been set for a January 1990 release in America by MCA. I couldn't do it though. I was focusing intently on getting back to the top of the charts. My desire for success was all. A lucid and painfully honest entry in my diary of summer 1989 shows how much I wanted the new album to succeed. I'm disgusted at my chronic jealousy of others less talented than myself. So like some bitchy brat, I cry and kick and scream for attention. Love me, I'm great, is my demand from everyone. It's terrible, disgusting, but it drives me on. I can't accept defeat the way I suspect many feel that I should after the decline of Viva La Rock. I'm not an actor or a rock and roll star. I'm adamant, whatever that might be. Karen became the only person that I could vent my anger and fears on. Unsurprisingly, after only 6 months of living together, she packed her bags and left. I could feel the same sense of desperation coming over me as she packed that I'd felt when Mandy had declared our relationship over, but I didn't try to stop Karen leaving. The next day I cleaned the house from top to bottom and then invited another woman over for dinner. In January 1990, I could feel that my confidence was returning as Room at the Top went into the top 30 in England, eventually peaking at number 13. The journalists who came to interview me were a bit younger than I remembered, and they were all very courteous and positive about the record. It struck me that they might well have been fans 5 years ago. The first 3 months of the year was spent in a whirl of work activity, but as 1990 wore on, once again life slowed up. I landed a role in a Dennis Hopper movie, Midnight Heat, but filming didn't begin until late July. To prepare myself, I began attending acting classes with Harry Mastrogeorge. Harry was an original and didn't follow any method except his own. He gave us all manner of things to read, including Samuel Beckett and Dylan Thomas. In my heart, I knew that I wasn't a great actor but hoped to learn enough to get better at it. Harry became a kind of father figure to me. Treat the text as if it were your Bible, he always told his class. Forget all that method business and learn the lines that were written. I appreciated that enormously because I didn't get method acting and enjoyed really getting to understand what the writer had created. In Midnight Heat, I played a biker named Danny, who I decided had to be on the edge, half mad and half ecstatic, as if he's making a film and none of it was actually happening to him. I could almost have been assessing myself. All my filming had to be done at night, which meant that I'd sleep during the day, but the work cured my depression. I loved arriving home as dawn broke, being greeted by Elvis and Alfie, drinking coffee as the neighbourhood awoke, slipping into sleep knowing that I had things to do when I awoke. Soon after finishing the film, I flew to London and wrote new songs with Marco for what I hoped would be the second MCA album. Yet, only a few months after making some great recordings of the new songs with Bernard Edwards of Chic producing, and despite having sold over 400,000 copies of Manners and Physique in the States, MCA announced that they were dropping me. I was annoyed and a little surprised, and although being determined to not let it affect me and knowing that my new songs were more than good enough to warrant release, inevitably the news was depressing. It marked the beginning of a very bad period in my life. End of CD 3.